Whoa, it's a bigger turnout than I expected. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. Let's start my story with a story. So I spent the primary years of my life growing up in small towns in India. So for small town folks, life is simpler, it's quieter, it's definitely calmer, and I liked it like that. At the age of 11, however, owing to my father's profession, we decided to shift to New Delhi, one of the biggest metropoles in India. For someone so used to the simplicities of small town life, moving to this big city, so bustling, so full of life, so fast-paced, yet so impersonal, I was overwhelmed. It took me almost half a decade to really get used to it. Now, for most people living in small towns in India, moving to this big city would have been the final move. As upper middle class or middle class Indians, we don't dream that big. Thanks to our inferiority complex, thank you, colonialism, and also the lower currency rate, moving abroad is not an option that we consider that seriously. We just feel like we won't fit in, socially, economically, any of the other aspects. But I had a dream. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to meet all the people from different walks of life. And at the same time, I was also really scared. If the Delhi move was any example, how could a small town boy like me really fit into all of these vastly international cultures? They looked so fancy, you know. This is where everything changes. At the age of 15, as I was getting used to my life in New Delhi, after the culture shock, life, that very life, decided to throw me in for a spin, and I got a chance to move to Singapore, one of the biggest cultural melting pots of the world, alone, again, at the age of 15. In a frenzy of excitement and a lot of other emotions, I was so anxious about moving alone, I decided to relocate. It was a good opportunity, and I was not going to miss it. But soon after my relocation, I realized that a big dream and big heart is not enough to survive in strange lands. Singapore was so different. The people, the culture, the language, the accents, I was so overwhelmed, it took me a couple years to really get used to it. But as things go, I learned, I survived, and eventually I thrived. As time passed and as COVID passed, I moved to Yale NUS, which was even more international and even more upfront about it. Since then, I've spent a summer learning in the United States. I recently spent half a year working in Paris, and I look forward to going to the UK for exchange in the following years. After all of these experiences, if my small town self were to look at me right now, integrating at various degrees and various timescales with people from different parts of the world, he would not believe that this was possible. Although it very much is. Almost as a defense mechanism, learning to grow around various international cultures at still a young age, I'm 19, I got to develop pretty quickly a mechanism of ways that will help me fit quicker into the societies that I'm entering or I'm currently situated in. And I feel like the lessons that I draw from it have universal applications. And that is what I'm here to talk about today. The subtle art of fitting in internationally. So when we are all moving to different cities and different countries, we're always riddled with questions about how we're really going to fit into this new land, how we're going to feel less alien in this new society we're entering. Based on my experiences, I've come up with 4 keys which I feel are going to help you put your best foot forward when it comes to entering these stranger lands. So without further ado, let's jump into those. First and foremost, allow yourself to be stupid and ask questions if you don't know. When I was in France, I found myself on a work trip to the south of France, and one night I was having tagine for dinner with the Moroccan family that hosted me. Sitting around the table with that meaty stew in the center, I saw everyone taking the bony parts, and not knowing much about the dish, I decided to do the same. At the end of the dinner, however, the host comes up to me and asks why I took the bony parts if I was not planning on eating the bone marrow. It was then that I realized in my ignorance, I had just wasted some good food because you only take those parts if you want to eat the marrow. It wasn't that big of a deal. We laughed about it, and I said sorry, I learned my lesson. But I had an even bigger takeaway from this entire incident. and that was to learn to ask. Whenever in new environments, we try not to step on anyone else's toes or seem stupid by showing that we don't know what's going on. Instead, thus, to preserve harmony, we try to figure everything out on our own independently. And if you are one of these people out here in the audience, I have some different news for you. Sometimes telling that you don't know something might just be more helpful. Allowing yourself to feel stupid instead of acting smart might just help you belong a little bit more. It has myriad benefits. Portraying yourself as this damsel in distress is going to always pique people's interests in you and also make you much more tolerable. At the same time, your interest in their culture is a natural conversation starter and can lead to deeper bonds and intercultural exchange if you allow that to be so. Lastly, and quite intuitively, studies show, facts, that people tend to be more interested in you if you show an interest in them. Okay, so what I'm saying is occasionally it's important to show that you don't know something, to be humble about things, because the proper ways to sit and eat and say hello might be very different from what you have grown up learning in your part of the world. And thus, letting go of that ego might just make you a tad bit more approachable when it comes to finding your place in these communities. While portraying yourself as this new guy in town might help you, stand out in some ways and make you more tolerable, sometimes it's not always good to stand out in every possible way. And that brings me to my second key. Learn to blend in to the cultural preferences and tastes. Actor and producer Daniel Levy, known for the authentic portrayal of characters in his work, said in an interview that clothing is only second to speaking when it comes to telling a story. For people who are entering foreign lands, your story is a desire to find your place in that crowd. So blend in. Clothing is one of the easiest ways you can find your place in the crowd because you don't have to change much of the product, only the packaging. So if you feel like you can fit into and wear the normative cultural clothes of a particular place, go ahead and do it. But also, if you feel that that might not be the correct thing, that your personal preferences don't align with it, or you fear cultural appropriation, that is okay too. Because more important to what you're wearing are the colors that you're wearing. Every country has its favorite set of colors. From my experience, India and the US tend to be in the brighter, bolder color spectrum, although in very different ways. France finds its browns, beiges, and blacks to be the chicest, and Singapore has a unique love for pastels and plains. Color psychology is greatly situated in these cultural contexts that it finds itself in. So playing by the psychology and really donning the colors of these cultures can help you blend in faster and much more organically than you believe could be true. And I think that's a pretty good deal. Moving on to the other thing that can help you blend in, and it's quite obvious, is a language. We all speak different languages, we all know different languages, but sometimes even if we speak the same language, we might have different meanings or accents. I code switch all the time. For example, the way I'm speaking in hawker centers might be different to the way I speak in class, might be different to the way I grew up speaking, or might be different to the way I spoke in France. Just kidding, I spoke in perfect French, all right? My point is that learn to speak to people in the ways that they understand. This could be through body language modifications or through actual modifications in your language. Even if you mess up, that is completely fine because, remember key one, making an effort into getting to know someone's culture still counts. Now that we're so busy blending in and getting to learn about new cultures, I think it is time we take a step back and realize that we are all humans of the 21st century, and thus might have some traits in common. And that brings me to my third key, recognize commonalities. We all like to sleep. We all love procrastination. The people you meet might share the same love for mathematics as you, or might have the same authors or the same favorite books as you. Globalization and the internet have brought the world closer in beautiful ways. So even if the apparent stranger sitting next to you might seem to be completely different, you may have much more in common than you initially thought. The world has become a global village, and sometimes it's important to leverage the fraternity created by it to find your niche in these places, because that will help you make these places a little less foreign and a smidge closer to the comfort of home. Now that we've covered the first three keys, before I move on to the fourth and final one, let's recap. Going backwards, recognize common grounds. If you don't know how to recognize them, create them by blending in. If you don't know how to blend in, learn to ask and be a little humble about that. At the end of the day, although, there can be times when learning to blend into various cultures can feel a little daunting and make us feel like imposters. Undergoing all of these transformations, learning about cultures, trying out new fashion trends, code switching, can help us end up making us feel like we are trying to put on a fake identity over our real identity. Now, I have a great problem with this line of reasoning because it fundamentally assumes that we are past representations of our past selves. We are static, we are non-changing, that anything we do is to fit into all of these cultures is automatically an infringement to who we really are. And that brings me to my fourth, final, and in my opinion, the most important key of this speech. Believe that you can change and still be yourself. Our identities are fluid and ever-changing. Instead of a solid mass, it's incremental in nature. So the things that you learn and pick up in order to find a place of belonging in these new alien places is not taking away from your identity, but rather adding to its vividness and richness. So you might end up having a different personality in different situations, but that's literally the way it works. You are a different version of you in different places, but you are still a version of yourself. Accepting the plurality of your identities can really take you a mile in trying to fit in various international cultures. Learning to let go of the rigid molds that you yourself or the society have imposed upon you and your identity might just be the kindest thing that you do to yourself, allowing you to grow, learn, survive, and like me in Singapore all those years ago, eventually thrive wherever you might be in this big, beautiful, strange, strange world. Thank you so much.